The results have come back. I'm afraid this time they're pretty conclusive. It's never easy, this.
Today we will look at one of the greatest stories about the meaning of life, originally found in Tolstoy's 1886 novella The Death of Ivan Ilyich, adapted in 1952 into the Japanese masterpiece by Kurosawa, Ikiru, which translates to live, which has been recently adapted into a British drama film titled Living. But let me begin this video by asking, when is it that we usually begin to wonder about the meaning of life? Perhaps the question arises as we observe a sunset and a deep sense of happiness sets in, one that seems to promise that the answer is almost there within our reach. Perhaps it arises as our daily lives get thrown out of their axis, such as by war and natural disaster and personal failure and disease, leaving us anxious with the need to hold onto an easy answer to remedy our suffering. As the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer observes, undoubtedly it is the knowledge of death, and therewith the consideration of the suffering and misery of life, that give the strongest impulse to philosophical reflection and metaphysical explanations of the world. As our protagonist learns of his terminal illness, it's as if he got woken up from decades of living in a dream. Always the same job, the same routine, like a machine or a zombie, as they put it in the British adaptation. The realization of his own mortality breaks that cycle and creates a yearning for something meaningful. But what is something meaningful? Not knowing the answer, our protagonist cycles through a couple of options. The first one that he turns to is a very understandable one now more than ever before in our hedonistically oriented society. Enjoy the now, have fun, create experiences, turn to pleasure. Naturally, there's only so much that we can get out of pleasure before the same anxiety and pain returns, now in need of even more pleasure to wash over it. As the ancient Greek philosopher Plato observed in his dialogue Philebus, pursuing pleasure without moderation or higher purpose only leads into a never-ending desire for more, akin to trying to fill a bottomless barrel. Maybe, he observed, pleasure should not be a goal by itself, but merely a byproduct accompanying a person's way of life, for pleasure itself cannot constitute the highest good. This has to be found elsewhere. Seemingly realizing the futility of this endless cycle of hedonism, our protagonist turns to love. His relationship with his son is ruined, so he finds something meaningful in his companionship with a younger clerk from his office. As she tells him of the happiness that she found in a different job, creating dolls so that children all over Japan could play with them, our protagonist gets inspired by the idea that it is not yet too late to do something significant in his life. So, rather than to love, he turns to the final answer, accepting death, but leaving the world a better place as he has found it. He returns to his job at the office, and what follows in perhaps the most striking narrative leap in the history of cinema, our protagonist has died, and we observe his funeral. His co-workers, family and friends sit in a room and reflect on what kind of man he was, slowly revealing details from the final months of his life. Through this conversation, we learn how he has given himself to a cause and succeeded to make something significant. He did bring about change, even if only a barely perceptible change in the vast scheme of things. The film concludes that we should imagine him dying content, satisfied in having been given the opportunity to do this one final thing. The moral is clear. All of our lives are going to end someday, and we are very efficient at forgetting that fact so that we could lead a passive, comfortable life, safely consuming the illusion that death and illness and tragedy are always somewhere too far in the future to be truly considered. The film invites us to break free of this illusion and see that truly realizing our own mortality would lead us to live vastly different lives, and that living those vastly different lives, pursuing something truly meaningful in the face of our own mortality, would lead us to lead a life that we could only look back to with a sense that it was a life worth living. While Tolstoy's novella has been hailed as a significant work of literature, Akira Kurosawa's adaptation did change the original story substantially, which resulted in perhaps one of the greatest films of all time, so I do highly recommend this film. The British adaptation is a well-made film, but definitely lacking the powerful directorial vision of Kurosawa. If you have watched both, you will probably agree that the 1952 film has a raw quality that gets completely lost in the dreamy and highly polished version from 2022. There's just something haunting about the original, the expressive acting, the editing, the sound, everything working in a most striking unison. So I cannot recommend that movie enough to anyone interested in film or not. Thank you for watching this video. Please consider subscribing, since that helps me to make future videos. And if you have Letterboxd, you are definitely free to add me and follow my shorter reviews.